Good morning, all. It is Tuesday, and so it's time for Coffee with PC to get your week off, your Tuesday morning started off. Was reading this morning, and I told you, I guess last week, that I've been doing a chronological reading of the Bible, and this morning I finished the Old Testament. So that was quite a thing. 266 days to get through the Old Testament. Obviously, finishing up toward the end, and one of the passages I read this morning I wanted to share with you. It's actually just mostly one verse. It's in the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi, or as some people call him, the Italian prophet Malachi. Just a little joke there. A very little joke probably, but nonetheless. Malachi, when you think about Malachi, I was in Malachi chapter 3 and 4 today, and it's interesting that most of the time in church world, when Malachi chapter 3 comes up, if you've been around churches for a while, usually we talk about that passage that is about giving, about tithing. Don't rob God, but bring your tithes into the storehouse, which is a good passage and has some merit to it, and is probably the most often taught passage out of Malachi. But just a few verses past that is verse 16, Malachi 3:16. This beautiful gem of a verse. I first heard about it a few years ago. I want to say Beth Moore was talking about it in something Denise and I were listening to, and she mentioned this, and I came across it again today, and it just really kind of was significant. I wanted to share it with you. Malachi 3:16. So that 3:16 should be easy for us to remember. This is what the prophet says. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened, and he heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. Just a really remarkable verse toward the very end of the Old Testament. A lot of these minor prophets toward the end of the Old Testament are concerned with judgment, and even Malachi does some of that in his writing. The day of the Lord, the day of judgment, often a theme in these verses. But in the midst of that, this Malachi 3:16, this beautiful picture that God wrote a scroll of remembrance concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. It's an incredible thought. It actually, if you remember, I started that verse with the word then. And whenever you see that, it's a contrast. There's something going on. It's subsequently. It's something that happens next. And if you back up just a few verses in Malachi to verse 14, this is what a lot of people were saying. You have said, it is futile to serve God. What do we gain by carrying out his requirements and going like mourners? Another translation says, it is vain to serve the Lord. Some of the people of Israel looked at serving God as sort of a transactional way of life, that if they did the things God asked, then somehow God was obligated to bring benefit to them. And as they considered their particular situation in life and their evaluation of their own faithfulness, which for most of us, the evaluation of our own faithfulness is probably overvalued, but that's another story for another day. As they evaluated their faithfulness to God, and then they thought about what they had gotten from God, they didn't feel like it added up. Like they had sacrificed, they had served, they had done what they were supposed to do, and God wasn't coming through. And so many of the people of Israel said, it's pointless, it's empty, it's vain to serve the Lord because we're not getting anything out of it. And that's how a lot of people even today look at matters of faith. We have to be careful that we don't fall into that we think if we're good, somehow then God has to be good to us, and if we're bad, then God will be bad for us. The gospel of grace says that's not how this works. That's not how God reacts to us. Instead, he's offered us through Jesus grace. And so on the heels of that reality of many of the people in Israel, we get this verse that says there are many in Israel that's what they thought. There are many in our day that probably think the same thing, that they think God doesn't deliver for me, so why bother serving him? And in that arena, in that atmosphere, this word, Malachi 3:16, I almost slipped up and said John 3:16. Malachi 3:16 says, then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened, and he heard, and a scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. To think that our faithfulness, that when we serve God, not because of what he has done for us, we don't have that transactional view of God and faith. We don't go after him and say, God, if you'll do this for me, then I'll serve you. No, we understand that God is to be feared, is to be served, is to be loved because simply he is worthy. And when we feel that way, and when we discuss it, when we talk with each other, we get together, whether it be in worship services, whether it be in small Bible study groups, whether it be in your home as a family, or whether it be over coffee or at lunch with a friend in the faith. Whenever we talk about that, to think God not only remembers, but he writes down, has a scroll of remembrance written. By the way, this idea of a scroll of remembrance, let me give you some historical context. If you're familiar with another Old Testament book, the book of Esther, we get an idea of maybe what's at work here. You see, Esther is in the court of the king, and Mordecai, her relative, along the way. At the end of chapter 2 of Esther, it tells us that Mordecai reveals a plot to the king. And to remember that, it says at the end of Esther chapter 2 that it's written down. Let me just turn back a few pages. It says, and when the report was investigated and found to be true, all this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So Mordecai unveils this conspiracy, he tells, and it's recorded. And then here's the interesting thing. It's not till chapter 6 that we learn that the king is having a hard time sleeping. And so he calls for someone to read to him from the annals of his reign, this book of remembrance, we might say. And that night, as he's having a hard time sleeping, it's revealed to him. The passage that's read is about Mordecai uncovering this plot. And he determines to honor Mordecai. And the rest of the book of Esther kind of turns on that reality, Mordecai, Haman, Esther, and all that sort of thing. But I say that not to recall the story of Esther, but to say that's kind of what I think of when I think of this, that when we talk with each other, that it says the Lord listens and he hears and he writes it down. And here's the encouragement. Look, I wish at times faith was more transactional. Honestly, I wish that if I needed something from God, if I just, jumped through the right few hoops, somehow he would, nod his head, wink, snap his fingers, however it works, and make it happen. But those of us who have traveled this journey of faith know that is not, in fact, how it works. That we at times persevere because we recognize the worthiness of our God. But Malachi wants us to know that recognizing his worthiness, especially and even when it's difficult, even when we're desperate for his activity in our life, to nonetheless talk about and fear the Lord, that he hears and he will remember, because that's written down. And it might not be today, and it might not be tomorrow, it might be sometime later, from chapter 2 to chapter 6 of the book of Esther. It might be that in our life. We might just be at the end of chapter 2 when we're dealing with this thing and we're in the middle of it, and we're trying to be faithful, and we think God hasn't heard, but around chapter 6 of this story that unfolds of our faith, that book is going to be opened, and God is going to remember. He heard and he remembered. He listened and he heard and he wrote it down. Be encouraged by that today. Your faithfulness never goes unnoticed. Your words, your fear of God, your worship of God, he always sees it. He always listens and he hears it, and one day records it so that it can be remembered. So take heart in that this day, especially if you're going through a particularly tough situation, a tough patch in your life, and know that God is there, that he hears, that he listens, and that he remembers. All right, well, that's my encouragement for you today. Malachi 3:16. Might want to pick it up and look at that sometime. It's been a fascinating thing. I'm kind of looking forward to, got to be honest, tomorrow morning when I go to my Bible reading. I'm in the New Testament, get to the story of Jesus, and I'm looking forward to that. And really, that's the ultimate time where God remembers and restores and forgives all the stuff that we might go through in the todays of our faithfulness. So do that. Hey, let me make a quick announcement to wrap up. We're back in-person worship. We've met 2 Sundays now, and the first 2 Sundays we had a 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock service, and we've seen the numbers of people that are coming, and we think we can do one service just at 9 o'clock. So that's what we're going to try this week. We're looking for a single 9 o'clock service. But let me say, it's even more important this week that if you are planning to attend in person, that you let us know. I'm going to put the registration link for our 9 o'clock service in the notes here on Facebook Live and elsewhere, so you can look at that. Or you can just go to the homepage of our website, fbckl.com, and you'll see, scroll down, it'll say register for June 28th service. You click that and you can sign up. That helps us. We're probably going to need an overflow if a lot of people come. We kind of have an idea how many we can fit in the sanctuary, and then how many we can fit in the fellowship hall with a video venue there. But we just would like to know so we can plan accordingly. So please, please, please help us out by letting us know if you're planning to be here this Sunday. Just the one service, it looks like, given the numbers for the last 2 weeks. If we see a lot of people start signing up, we may have to make some adjustments. But that's the plan at this point. So do us a favor and help us out and register. Other than that, I hope you have a great Tuesday, and I hope you will today remember that God remembers, that as you live your life in fear of the Lord, and as you talk with others, that God listens and He hears, and He'll write it down, a scroll of remembrance in His very presence is being prepared to honor your faithfulness to Him. All right, guys, have a great day. Happy Tuesday. We'll touch base with you again on Friday.